and that is that they saw flares going off of Soulmate, Brian and Lynette's 46-foot catch.
The last photograph of Lynette Hooker was taken at 4:30 in the afternoon on April 4th, 2026. She is standing poolside at the Abaco Inn. She is wearing a light green bathing suit cover-up. On her left wrist, clearly visible, is her Apple Watch. She is smiling. She does not know that in approximately 3 hours, according to her husband, she will be in the water. She does not know that by the following morning, she will be missing. She does not know that the watch on her wrist will end up back on the boat. She does not know any of that. She is just standing there, smiling, at 4:30 in the afternoon, wearing a green cover-up and a watch that will later become one of the most important unanswered questions in this entire case. That photograph is where this story begins. Not with the disappearance. Not with the search. Not with the flares. With a woman who was alive and photographed at 4:30 p.m. wearing a watch that physically cannot explain how it got back to a boat that, according to her husband, she never returned to. Brian Hooker is Lynette's husband. He is the man at the center of this case. He has not been charged with any crime. His attorneys have stated clearly and on the record that he categorically and unequivocally denies any wrongdoing. He has said publicly that he is committed to finding his wife and is dedicating his efforts to coordinating the search. We say all of that plainly, because it is the truth, and because this program is about evidence and contradiction, not accusation. Brian Hooker is innocent until proven otherwise. That is not a courtesy. That is the law. But there is a gap between his account and what the evidence suggests. And that gap is not small. That gap has a shape. And the shape of that gap is what this program is about. Here is what Brian says happened on the night of April 4th. He and Lynette had drinks at the Abaco Inn. They walked to the dock. They got into their dinghy, an 8-foot hard-bottom motorized boat, and departed for their sailboat, Soulmate, which was anchored off the western shore of Elbow Key in roughly 4 to 10 feet of water depending on the tide. The channel they were crossing runs between Elbow Key and Lubbers Quarters. The distance is short. A local charter captain who retraced the route for Fox News Digital made the trip in approximately 4 minutes. Brian says the wind had picked up to somewhere around 20-something knots. He says Lynette, in his words on a recorded phone call obtained by CBS News, bounced off the dinghy. He says she had the boat key on her, attached to the safety lanyard that cuts the engine when an operator goes overboard. He says the motor died when she went in. He says the spare key was in her dry bag, which was also with her in the water.
Everybody would have seen from Elbow Key, everybody would have seen, this distress signal going up high at Lubbers. Instead, they're saying they saw a flare on his sailboat before 9 o'clock. Now, what you doing on your sailboat before 9 o'clock, if you're on it? No one's on your sailboat before 9 o'clock.
He says he lost an oar. He says he threw the anchor out, fixing his position in the water. He says by the time he got the anchor set, he was probably a quarter to a half mile from where Lynette went over. He says he yelled for an hour. He says the moon had not yet risen and he could not see her. He says he eventually drifted, paddling with one oar, across the Sea of Abaco, 4 miles northeast, and washed ashore at Marsh Harbor Boatyard sometime around 4 in the morning on Sunday, April 5th. He says he asked a security guard named Edward Smith for water. He says his wife was still in the water. He says he had no way to call for help during that entire 8-hour window because his cell service was spotty. No mayday. No marine radio broadcast. Number 911 call. Nothing for 8 to 9 hours while his wife was somewhere in that water. That is his account. That is the story he has told. And parts of it were delivered in his own voice on a recorded phone call he made to a friend on April 7th, 3 days after Lynette disappeared. CBS News obtained that recording. On that call, he said something that most people have skimmed past. He said, and these are his exact words, he threw the anchor out last instead of first, and could not really explain why. He is the one who said that. He put it in his own account. Read what that means. The correct sequence if your wife has just gone into the water and you want to stay near her is to anchor immediately before the wind and current carry you away from her. He did not do that. He lost the oar first. Then he anchored. By then, he says, he was a quarter to a half mile from her. In 20-something knot wind. With no engine. In the dark. After anchoring too late. He also said on that same call, we stayed too long. We left too dark. All kinds of no life jackets. Those are his words. No life jackets. His wife, who by every account from people who knew her was an experienced sailor and an experienced swimmer, was in the water at night, in wind, without a life jacket. Her daughter, Carly Ashworth, told NBC News, "My mom is very fit and strong. She's a good swimmer. Why was she swimming away from the boat? It just doesn't make sense to me." She told Fox News there was a history in the relationship that included physical violence, including allegations of choking and threats to throw Lynette overboard. Those are Carly's stated allegations on the public record. Brian denies wrongdoing. Now here is where the account begins to break apart, not because of what anyone is accusing Brian of, but because of what the physical world does and does not allow. Start with the flares. Brian told Edward Smith, the security guard at Marsh Harbor Boatyard, that he fired 2 flares from the dinghy while anchored on a reef at the north end of Lubbers Quarters. 2 flares. That number came from Brian. Smith repeated it to Fox News Digital on the record. So there is no dispute that Brian says 2 flares went up that night from his location in the dinghy. Here is the problem. Multiple witnesses on Elbow Key, on land, together that same night, with a direct line of sight to the anchored vessels in the channel, reported seeing flares. Not 1. Flares. Plural. Their observation matches Brian's count. The disagreement is not about the number. The disagreement is about the location. Because what the witnesses told investigative journalist Ashley Banfield, who traveled to the Bahamas and conducted these interviews herself for her podcast Drop Dead Serious, is that the flares they saw did not come from Lubbers Quarters. They came from Soulmate. They came from the Hooker sailboat, anchored off the western shore of Elbow Key, sitting at its mooring while, according to Brian, think carefully about what a flare actually does in the night sky. It is not ambient light. It is not a glow on the horizon. It is a single, bright, arcing visual signal fired into the air from a specific point on the water. The entire purpose of a flare is to mark a location. It is a coordinate written in fire across the sky. Anyone within line of sight of it can tell you almost without thinking where it came from. Not the exact GPS coordinates, but the direction. East or west. Toward the lighthouse or away from it. Over the water, over the land. That much the human eye does automatically and accurately. Lubbers Quarters is to the west of Elbow Key.
He told me, and I was in shock, so I didn't say much, but he got off the phone pretty quick. And then he just called me today, but I didn't answer it, and he left a voicemail saying they found the flotation device.
Soulmate was anchored off the western shore of Elbow Key itself. These are not the same direction. From the perspective of an observer standing on Elbow Key land, a flare fired from the north end of Lubbers Quarters and a flare fired from a vessel anchored near Elbow Key sit on completely different vectors. The angular separation between those 2 origins is wide. It is not subtle. It is not a matter of squinting in the dark and making an honest mistake. It is a question of looking left or looking right. Lubbers is one direction. Soulmate is another. A witness with reasonable eyesight in stable conditions looking out over water they know, at vessels they have been watching for days, does not get those 2 directions confused. Multiple witnesses together do not get them confused in the same direction at the same time without coordinating with each other. Elbow Key is a small place. The waterfront properties on the western shore face directly out over that channel. The anchored vessels in that channel are part of the daily visual landscape for anyone staying there. The witnesses Banfield interviewed were not tourists who glanced at the water once. They knew where Soulmate was anchored. They had seen it there. And when they say a flare came from Soulmate, they are not guessing about a vessel they had never noticed before. They are placing an event at a vessel whose position they already knew at the moment the flare lit up the sky. That is a different category of observation than a stranger pointing at a random light in the dark. These are people who already had the map in their heads, and something lit up the wrong location on that map. This is not one witness. Banfield's reporting describes a group of people who were together in one place at one time, all describing the same thing. That is a corroborated observation made by people who had no reason to coordinate a story, no relationship to each other through Brian or Lynette, no incentive to fabricate a detail that contradicts his account. They were just there. And they saw what they saw. And what they saw was flares coming from Soulmate. If they are correct, then someone was on that boat. Now layer onto that the surveillance video. A private property on Lubbers Quarters had a camera facing east across the Sea of Abaco toward Elbow Key and the area where Soulmate was anchored. Per Banfield's reporting, footage from that camera shows a small dark object visible in the frame near the anchored vessels during the relevant time window. Banfield has raised the question of whether that object could be the Hooker dinghy returning to Soulmate. She did not state it as a forensic conclusion. She stated it as a question that requires an answer. We are stating it the same way. It is not a court exhibit. It is privately recorded footage being examined by a credentialed journalist. But the camera position is important. A camera on Lubber's quarters pointed east captures the channel between the two landmasses. Anything moving through that channel, including an 8-foot dinghy, would pass through the field of view. If something was near those anchored vessels during that window, and Brian's account says the dinghy never reached Soulmate, then something is visible that should not be visible. That is not interpretation. That is a discrepancy between an account and a recording. Then there is the watch. Come back to the watch, because the watch is where the physical world stops being interpretable in Brian's favor. Lynette Hooker was photographed wearing her Apple Watch on her left wrist at 4:30 p.m. on April 4th. That photograph exists. It was obtained by Banfield's team. The watch is clearly visible. After Lynette disappeared, the watch was found on Soulmate. Brian says Lynette went into the water in the channel. He says neither of them returned to the boat. He says the dinghy drifted away from Soulmate, not toward it. He says the boat was untouched from sunset until the following morning. A watch cannot remove itself from a human wrist and return to a sailboat. It cannot float across a channel and reattach itself to a stanchion. It cannot navigate wind and current and find the one vessel in the area belonging to its owner. That is not how the physical world works. Not hypothetically. Not under any combination of wind and tide and luck. A watch on a wrist in the water does not end up on an unoccupied boat 4 miles from where the woman wearing it disappeared. That is a physical impossibility, and physical impossibilities do not resolve themselves without explanation. There are only a few paths through this. Either Lynette removed the watch before getting in the dinghy, in which case it would have to have been removed sometime between 4:30 p.m. when she was photographed wearing it and 7:30 p.m. when they departed the dock, and it would have had to be left on a boat that according to Brian she was not on when the incident occurred. Or the watch was on her when she went into the water, and someone separated her from it and brought it back to the boat. Or someone who had access to the watch put it back on Soulmate at some point during that night or the following morning. Every one of those possibilities requires something to have happened on or involving Soulmate that Brian's account does not account for. Every single one. There is also the matter of what Brian told searchers. Jim Todd, an experienced boater who volunteered for the search effort, sat down with Banfield and described asking Brian what Lynette was wearing so searchers could identify her in the water. Todd said Brian's answer was a black two-piece bathing suit. That is the bathing suit Lynette is wearing under the green cover-up in the 4:30 p.m. photograph. It is what she had on at the pool. But she was also photographed in the green cover-up. And when Todd pressed for a description of her clothing, the green cover-up was not mentioned. When the ocean is being searched for a missing person, the color and description of what they are wearing is one of the first and most operationally critical pieces of information searchers ask for. Omitting the green cover-up that she was visibly wearing hours before she went into the water is not a small detail to get wrong. Todd also raised the departure time. He told Banfield the dock departure may have been closer to 6:38 p.m. rather than the 7:30 p.m. Brian has stated in multiple tellings. If that shift is accurate, and it has not been independently confirmed, it changes the entire framing of the incident. Brian's account depends heavily on the sun having set approximately 10 minutes after Lynette went into the water, meaning the channel was already dark and visibility was already gone when she disappeared. But if departure was closer to 6:38, there may still have been daylight when Lynette went over. That is a different equation entirely for questions about visibility, about swimming to shore, about the moon not having risen, about whether a strong swimmer in that channel at that hour could have made it to land 150 yards away. Todd described asking Brian to point to the location where Lynette went overboard. Brian pointed near the channel's final piling. From that spot, Todd estimated the shore was approximately 150 yards away. Todd, who has spent years on those waters, said it did not add up to him that a strong swimmer in the conditions Brian described would not be able to make that distance. Lynette's own daughter has echoed this. The channel is not the open ocean. It is a known, navigated, shallow water passage used by tourists and local residents regularly. At low tide it runs 4 feet deep. At high tide, 10. It is not a wilderness crossing. It is a short, traffic channel that the hookers themselves had been crossing regularly for weeks. Then there is the 8-hour gap itself. From approximately 7:30 p.m. on April 4th to approximately 4 a.m. on April 5th. 9 hours during which Brian says he was drifting alone in a disabled dinghy with no cell service, no marine radio, no way to call for help, no mayday, number 911, nothing. His wife was somewhere in that water. He says he yelled for an hour. He says he paddled. He says he drifted 4 miles northeast and washed up at Marsh Harbor Boatyard. Brian Hooker worked for AT&T. He spent years in the telecommunications industry. Banfield's reporting has raised the question of what someone with that professional background would know about Wi-Fi connectivity, Starlink access, GPS location, and emergency communication options in a marine environment. That is not an accusation. It is a question about what was available to him and what he knew about what was available to him, given his professional experience. Emergency communication in a marine situation is not dependent on cell bars alone. That gap of 8 to 9 hours with zero communication outreach while his wife was missing is a question the investigation will need to answer. And then there is the drift itself. Brian says he drifted 4 miles northeast from the channel southwest of Elbow Key all the way to Marsh Harbor Boatyard. Banfield's reporting has examined the wind data from that night and has raised questions about whether the prevailing wind direction during that window is consistent with a disabled dinghy drifting from the channel between Elbow Key and Lubbers Quarters to Marsh Harbor Boatyard to the northeast. We are not meteorologists. We are not going to make a definitive claim about wind vectors. But the question has been raised by credentialed investigative reporting, and it remains open. Wind does not blow wherever a story needs it to blow. The geometry of all of this is not complex. 3 independent observation streams. Witnesses on Elbow Key reporting flares from Soulmate. A surveillance camera on Lubbers Quarters showing something near the anchored vessels. An Apple Watch on a boat that its owner should not have been near. None of these 3 streams coordinated with each other. None of them came from a single person who could be wrong or mistaken or have an agenda. They come from different places, different people, different types of recording. And all 3 of them point at the same vessel during the same window of time. All 3 of them sit in tension with the same statement. The statement that nobody was on the boat. The Royal Bahamas Police Force executed a search warrant on Soulmate. Electronic devices were seized. That review is ongoing. What is on those devices, phone activity, GPS data, communications logs, photo metadata, and critically, Apple Watch sync data, has not been made public. Whatever those devices contain will either support Brian's account or contradict it. There is no version of events where that data is neutral. The Apple Watch in particular is not just an object. It is a recording device. It logs heart rate continuously. It logs movement. It logs location data when paired with a phone or connected to a network. If Lynette was wearing it at 4:30 in the afternoon and it ended up on Soulmate by the following morning, the watch itself was recording during the hours in between. That data exists somewhere. It is either preserved or it has been compromised. The investigation will determine which. Brian was held in the Bahamas for 5 days. He was released on April 13th not because prosecutors cleared him, but because the statutory filing window under Bahamian law elapsed before the case file was complete. Bahamian authorities publicly stated after his release that he remains a suspect. He returned to the United States and retained counsel in Michigan. His attorneys have stated he categorically denies any wrongdoing. That release is sometimes described as vindication. It is not vindication. It is a procedural outcome. The investigation did not close. It did not pause. It continued. It is continuing right now. Lynette Hooker is still missing. Only a flotation device has been recovered along the shoreline. The search has shifted from rescue to recovery. The investigation remains active. Here is what we know with certainty. A woman was last photographed alive at 4:30 in the afternoon wearing a watch. That watch was found on a boat the following morning. Her husband says nobody returned to that boat. Multiple witnesses say they saw flares fired from that boat. A surveillance camera captured something near that boat. And her husband says he was 4 miles away, alone in the dark, drifting, with no way to call for help, for 9 hours while she was in the water. Either 3 independent evidence streams are all wrong about the same boat in the same window of time in the same direction. Or Brian Hooker's account of that night is incomplete. Those are the only 2 options. There is no third path that resolves this without one of those 2 things being true. We are not a court. We are not law enforcement. We are not rendering a verdict. Brian Hooker is innocent until a court says otherwise, and no court has said anything yet. But the evidence has a shape. And the shape of the evidence points at one place, one vessel, one window of time, and one account that has not yet explained what that evidence describes. The flares were real. The witnesses were real. The watch was real. The surveillance footage was real. Lynette Hooker was real. She was standing poolside in a green cover-up and an Apple Watch at 4:30 in the afternoon. She deserves an explanation that the physical world can actually support. So far, no one has provided one. That is where this case stands. The investigation is open. The devices are being reviewed. The watch is somewhere in an evidence chain. And somewhere in the Bahamas, question of where those flares came from is still waiting for an answer that holds together when you put it against a map, a camera, a group of witnesses, and a watch found on a boat that nobody was supposed to be on.